Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com/changelog. Move fast and fix things like we do here at Changelog. Catch your errors before your users do with Rollbar. If you're not using Rollbar yet or you haven't tried it yet, they have a special offer for you. Go to rollbar.com/changelog. Sign up and integrate Rollbar to get $100 to donate to open source projects via Open Collective. Once again, rollbar.com/changelog. From Changelog Media, this is the Changelog, conversations with the hackers, the leaders, and the innovators of software development. I'm Adam Stacoviak, editor-in-chief here at Changelog, and on today's show, Jerod and I talk with Angie Byron, a core contributor and staple of the Drupal community. Angie took us to a place we did not expect to go. Since we've never really covered Drupal here on the show, sorry about that, we really didn't know what to expect, and she uncovered a vibrant and welcoming community of open source leaders and contributors that really speaks to our hacker hearts here at Changelog. And to be quite honest with you, we left the call with Angie inspired. From the background to the tech to the usage of the software, the communication at all levels of the community, Drupal is doing something so right, and we're happy to celebrate with them as they march on to the Framlication beat of their own drum. Regardless of who you are, what code or language you sling, this is a show not to be missed. Angie, we are definitely not deep in the weeds on Drupal, so we're coming to this show in high hopes that you can catch us up on all things Drupal. I think I can go back to potentially like when Leo Laporte started Twit. I recall the brand new site they launched, and this was maybe 2006 through 2008 range, somewhere in there, and that's where I really saw Drupal be really well used. But at the time I was using WordPress, was really getting into front-end development, CSS, design, and things like that. And I just never found myself getting into Drupal very far, but Drupal has such a rich history, great people. You're obviously a core contributor and core committer, co-author of books. I mean, the list is long, so help us understand, maybe an audience who's not very familiar with hearing more Drupal news. Catch us up. What is it? What are we missing?
Yeah, sure. What I try to explain Drupal in a couple of different ways, but the biggest way that I find to explain it is I call it a Framlication. So there's a lot of
a Framlication.
There's a lot of projects that are frameworks, and they're for developers, and they expose APIs, and they are meant to be used by people who write code for a living, and they're fine with that. And then there's applications that are meant to be used by non-technical users who don't know anything about the code, but they know how to fill in forms and press buttons and make things happen that way. Drupal is kind of at this interesting intersection where it is an application, like it's a content management framework. There's buttons to click, there's forms to fill out, there's content to be modeled, this kind of thing. But then at the same time, it offers robust APIs and extension points that allow developers to really get into it. So it kind of started as a project that was sort of by developers for developers, and it had, these kind of, at the time, this project started in 2001. So at the time, cutting edge things like, RSS and wow, stuff like that. But kind of attracted a developer audience who then, wanted to make it as flexible as possible. So there's extension points for everything under the sun. There's, 30,000 modules that you can use to add different types of functionality to it. And the whole thing is done in a really well architected way, so you kind of use the same concepts throughout. So like in an application like WordPress, if you want a photo gallery, there might be, like 70 or 80 different photo galleries you can pick from, and you pick which one is closest to what you need. And in Drupal, you will build your photo gallery up, and you build it by using an image, field module that will add images, support to upload things. You'll add a view, which displays images in a grid or in a listing or something like that. And you add a pager, and you add these other things. You really customize it to be exactly what you want. And for the most part, all of that is done without writing any code. But if you want to, take what's there and then extend the crap out of it and make it really, really custom, or have it integrate with some external system, or you want it to, output all of the data as JSON so you can use a decoupled front end or a mobile app or something like that in front of it, you can also do all of those things. So I like to say that Drupal's for, if you were like VCR kid back in the day, like your parents' VCR were Blink 12 and they didn't know how to fix it, so they'd call you over, and every VCR is kind of different, but you can kind of figure it out. Like, okay, well, I'll press buttons and there, it's fixed, So if you're okay tinkering with things and you kind of get a charge out of that and kind of figuring out how stuff works, I think Drupal's a really, really great solution. It is not at all a good solution if you want a website up and running in 5 minutes that you never have to touch again. That is not what Drupal is for. So for that, lots of other things, WordPress, Squarespace, like other types of things would be a better fit.
So I do have just a little bit more Drupal experience with Atom. I had one experience on a client contract where I was basically extending an existing Drupal installation. This is probably in the 2010 range. Mm-hmm. And my takeaway then, first of all, I had a successful install and extension. So I accomplished what I needed to accomplish. And everything seemed like it was pretty well organized. It wasn't that hard to understand, but there was so much there. I was kind of like, wow, this is like you walk into a library and you're just like, look at all those books. It just felt that way. It felt like, wow, this place has a lot of books. Yeah. I'm always curious, or I'm always interested in the architecture of things and why things are the way that they are, and like why WordPress is the way WordPress is, and why Drupal is the way Drupal is. And so a lot of times we can tease that out of its history. And especially with open source projects, is like, why does it exist in the first place? And sometimes you can kind of tease why the architecture, or why the way it is because of its original goal. So can you help us understand that Genesis story of where Drupal came from? I know it was around the turn of the century. It's been around for a very long time. By the way, also 40,000 contributors. I mean, this is like maybe the best kept secret in open source. This is a huge community, right? But where did it come from, and why did the creators create it?
So I wasn't around for these days. I came into the project more like 2005. Okay. But back in 2001, basically how it started is the project founder, Dries Buytaert, basically wanted a kind of a website thingy so that people in his dorm could communicate to one another, about like what types of things were going on. And so he built this thing in PHP and MySQL, because at the time that was the cutting edge technology.
Right. Yeah, it really was.
Yeah. And kind of like built this thing, and then others of his friends, because he was in a computer science type of program, contributed to it. And then he was very inspired by what Linus was doing with Linux, and, kind of the open sourcing of that, worked a bunch on Linux stuff as well. And so he really wanted to make his project open source. And at the time, the only other real like open source CMS back then was like PHP Nuke. And I don't know if you still have the battle scars from dealing with that whole mess, but like it was like...
I definitely had a couple of run-ins with that one.
Yeah. So PHP Nuke was like this very monolithic, it was driven by one developer, monolithic, did all the things built in, and it was kind of a big mess. No offense to the people who, I'm sure they worked hard on it. I used it, like it worked, it was like the thing to use back then, but it was really, really large and clunky and insecure and all of these different kinds of things. And so Drupal kind of came in to be like the opposite of that. We wanted something that was modular and flexible, something that had a really solid architecture, something that was well documented, something that was easily extensible by developers. Like, I remember PHP Nuke had like these websites like PHP Nuke hacks. And by that, what they meant is find this file, go to line 119 and start editing it, and then make it say something different than what it does, right? And then God forbid you use two different hacks and they collide with each other. And then God forbid again, you upload.
119 is no longer the hack line.
Right, yeah.
Act accordingly.
And then a security update comes out, and then you have to figure out how to get the security update with your hacks, and it's just kind of a mess.
The days, yes.
Yes. Sorry. I should have put a content warning before I started talking about that, because
some people are on the floor right now crying from unexpected autobiographical memories they have totally purged, but you brought back into existence.
Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize on behalf of my web development brethren. So that was kind of the age. And so Drupal really set out to be absolutely not any of those things at all. So Drupal shipped with a very small core, offering, which basically had, some basic functionality, handled like user logins and permissions and roles and stuff like that. It handled the ability to post content, the ability to, I don't even know. Again, it was before my time, but like some basic functionality to be able to, maintain content through web forms and stuff like that. But it was all built with the premise that we don't know what people are going to do with this thing. We want to make it super flexible. So what shipped with core was very small. And then if you wanted to do more things, like say be a recipe database or be a ratings and reviews website or something like that, you could still do that, but you would install these add-on modules, and then the add-on modules would be able to extend the Drupal core system just through the APIs and not through having to like have a PHP nuke hacks kind of site. And so a lot of developers really got interested in this, and so the early days of it were developers being like, oh, thank God this is open source and it's not like this monolithic horrible thing. Yay, and early days, back in 2004, I want to say, Howard Dean ran for president. And that didn't end up working out very well, mostly due to him. But
yeah,
it's really
I remember,
funny.
didn't he have this chant he was doing and that like basically ruined
He did
his
like some kind of a
run.
scream or something. It's really funny how our threshold for what gets you thrown out of politics has shifted.
I know. I was just thinking that. I was like, Howard Dean got to be rolling in his grave, or maybe he's still alive, but he's got to be angry.
President of the United States?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe president of Drupal or something like that.
No, sorry.
This is a big deal. Okay.
Yeah. It was a presidential candidate. He got pretty far, but he attracted a lot of these young technologists who were very passionate about somebody with half of a clue, like maybe becoming president. Oh my God, wouldn't that be neat? And so they started this grassroots political campaign, and they used Drupal to do it. And so what they did is they, they built like what's called a distribution of Drupal, which means like a pre-set up version of Drupal with a bunch of things already done. Kind of like, you can build a Docker container that already has this version of PHP and this version of that, the other thing. Drupal has this concept of distribution. So you can say, I want these, 7 modules and I want these settings set this way or whatever. And then you can kind of cookie cutter out websites based on a template. So they built one of these for the Howard Dean campaign. And so, Howard Dean, Connecticut and Howard Dean, California, and all these different locations would spin up a Drupal site. They all could talk to one another. And so like people were able to log in to each of the different sites and share content with one another. And it was the first time that technology was really used to power a political campaign, and that kind of got Drupal on the map, honestly. The other thing that got Drupal on the map is kerneltrap.org, which was a big kind of Linux news site back then, also adopted it. And so that got a lot of like Linux nerds really super excited about Drupal as well. So that's kind of what got Drupal on the map. And I came in very shortly after that. So I got to miss like those beginning parts, but got to hear about it kind of. And then I kind of accidentally got into this project just as it was like taking off. And then these days, it's used with like Grammy.com uses it to run the Grammys during like the busiest, traffic day of the year for them. A lot of like sports websites use it, government websites use it, nonprofit websites use it. Anybody with what we call a ambitious digital experience, whatever that means, tends to use Drupal for it because it's scalable, it's flexible, it's customizable, and yeah, it's become a household name in a lot of different areas, and it's running like 2% of the web right now, which is pretty significant.
Not too
considering
bad,
that it's not for like cat blogs and stuff like that. Like you can build a cat blog with Drupal, but that would kind of be like swatting a fly with a Cadillac or something. You don't need that.
It's overkill.
Yeah.
So just a quick follow up for those following along the show notes. I did link up 2004, the Scream that doomed Howard Dean YouTube video. So if you want to catch up on
so
your
we can
history
all
there,
study up on our history and what used to end a political career back in 2004.
Yep.
So good stuff.
Well, so we're adding that to the show notes then?
Yeah, that's going to be in the show notes for you.
Great.
So go watch that. It's only like a minute.
Catch up with that.
Yeah, catch up on that. So what brought you to it? So you said you came in right after kind of that first wave of adoption and the groundswell of people thinking, okay, Drupal's something I have to check out. What about you personally? Why did you get involved? What attracted you to the Framlication? Did I get it right? And
Sure.
and then why have you stuck around so long?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story too. So I first got a computer when I was like 16, which was a lot of years ago. Let's just put it that way. It was back when Debian Linux fit on 7 floppy disks. It was a long time ago.
Ooh, floppy disks.
Yeah, good times. So I learned about I learned about open source and Linux and all that kind of stuff back in like the mid 90s, and just like fell in love with this idea of like, holy crap, like, all these smart people kind of band together and they, work really hard on this problem, and then they give the solution away for free, and then anyone can take it and modify their needs. And this is such incredible benefit for humanity, like the educational institutions, nonprofits, non-government organizations, everything. So I got really, really interested in open source and Linux and all these kinds of things. But I thought I was not good enough to actually participate in an open source project, because I figured you had to be like Einstein or something to do that, So I looked up to all these, dudes who were like running the open source world, or I think it was still called free software back then. And, just like in awe of what they were accomplishing, but kind of felt like I was on the outside of that and could never really like break in. So Firefox, back in the day, set up a Drupal site for spreadfirefox.com. And it was a really interesting website that allowed anyone to upload, like, say, posters or post events of things that were happening at their campus, or like this kind of thing, to try and kind of do a grassroots marketing campaign around Firefox. And I'm one of those people that goes around viewing source on every website I visit, because I'm just curious, how it works underneath. And I saw the name Drupal, and I had never heard of it, but I kind of made a note for later, because I was like, oh, that's neat. Drupal kind of is powering that thing. Cool. So many, many years later, I was just graduating my final program in community college, and they announced that there was this program, this was in 2005, called Google Summer of Code. And so Google Summer of Code, for those who don't know, is where Google pays you a stipend over the summer to work with an open source project. And you basically take something off of their hit list, or you propose your own project or something like that. But you basically work 3 months embedded in an open source community. And then, as long as you do a good job and you don't slough off, then you get money. Yay, money and code and everything. So the idea is like, and so, programmers don't have to go flip burgers over the summer. They can instead flip bits, like it's a pretty good system.
Nice.
So,
I like
yeah.
that.
So I was in the very
Bits
first
love
run
burgers.
Was that their marketing campaign, or did you just come up with that one yourself?
No, that's theirs. No, I'm not nearly that clever. No. But yeah, so I saw Drupal on the list, and I figured, what the heck? And so I applied and got accepted.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, and then suddenly I kind of, once I was on like this side of the you must be this smart to contribute to open source wall, I was like, oh crap, anybody can do this. And people are like super grateful when you come in and you're like, hey, I know how to test things, and I know how to write documentation, and I know how to test this core patch, and I know how to do this. And like, I found that people were incredibly gracious and incredibly welcoming, and I just kind of dove in head first. And then I kind of got way too into it. I was like, on the webmasters team and the security team and the documentation team and the core developer team, and it's just like, I kind of got like really into Drupal, because it was basically like 10 years worth of, excitement built up, and I just like went crazy and went helping with everything. I ended up getting a job out of that, which I thought, I figured once Google Summer of Code was done, I would go write boring .NET accounting applications or something. I didn't know what I was going to do. But instead, I actually got a job doing open source in this thing that I loved, in this community that I loved, and it was amazing. So I try really hard, now I have a much higher profile in the community because I've worked my butt off for, like 13 years it's been.
Yeah.
Jesus,
Wow.
yeah.
In the trenches, for sure.
Yeah, so I try really hard to help other people who are facing that sort of imposter syndrome wall, because it definitely held me back, and I think it holds back a lot of other people that would otherwise be really into what we're doing but don't think they're good enough to contribute. Yeah, so.
Well, you're amongst friends, because that's exactly part of our mission with the changelog is to really break down that break the veil of open source and make it more open, and show the community that everybody has value and can contribute, and when we are that way, everybody benefits. So that's an amazing story.
Awesome.
I'm happy that once you got past, and I had a similar experience. Like, it's so scary, and you feel outsidery, and how do I do this thing? These people are all better than me, kind of feeling. And then you realize there's so many ways to contribute, and there's so much value that you can provide. that I'm excited that, first of all, your excitement is a bit contagious. So I'm getting excited about Drupal all of a sudden. But I love that once you got into it, you just went all in and made a career out of it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know how to like, if anything's worth doing, just worth overdoing, basically. That's how I live my life. But yeah, it was also helpful because the attitude was so great. Like, I've been part of communities where, the attitude is, oh, you don't know about the blah, blah, blah module? Pff, whatever. Like,
right.
Whatever,
RTFM,
like that.
And
in this community, it was the opposite. It was like, oh, you don't know about the blah, blah, blah module. Well, let me tell you all about it because it's awesome. You know what I mean? And it's like, and then you'll know about it and we can talk about it, So it's just like, that really, really helped. And I think that sort of kind of mentorship being built into the DNA of the community is really important, and that, predates my involvement, but I definitely have, tried to shepherd that forward myself and seen amazing efforts by other people in the community to shepherd forward those efforts as well. So
I think what's interesting is that your story of going from imposter to contributor to full-time open source predates most of the stories we share here on the show today, which is like, I guess, maybe current stories. And it seems like a trend that's happening today. Meanwhile, it happened to you, I don't know what year. I'm just guessing 2008-ish, 2009-ish, based on just trying to track
probably.
your history there.
I guess my first job would have been in 2006.
Okay.
And then, but I'd say when I became like a core committer, like that was 2008. That was a big deal, like leading up the Drupal 7 release, which was one thing I was going to mention is like, if the last time you touched Drupal was 2010, you really should maybe look at it again because we have been working on it since then and it's a bit better now. So, but yeah.
What do you think has kept you in Drupal? I mean, obviously you got a lot of passion and there's energy, but there's only so many things like that can keep you there. The community, the tech, like what is it that keeps you or has kept you there or just, I guess, hooked you is probably a better term because, I mean, you didn't try to leave, did you? And you just stayed. So something got you.
Yeah. By the way, we call the extension points in Drupal hooks. So you accidentally made an epic
Sweet.
Drupal pun. So nicely done.
Nice job, Adam.
I've done my homework here.
I would say it's probably a combination of things, and I would say 3 things, but I might end up saying 4 things. I'm sorry, but like one is definitely, and the primary one is definitely the people. We go to DrupalCons, which we have a couple times a year, and it's like a family reunion a lot of times. It's like people are there and they're hugging each other because they actually like each other, not because they're trying to like, make some sign of a signal or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's genuine. And I think also just the point at which I got in the community, I went through like some really tough personal stuff at like the end of 2015, 2016, and realized that like, my friends that I know from the Drupal community are actually my friends. And some of them I've known for like a decade, and, all of them coming up and helping me in various ways, like cooking me waffles or whatever, it's just like a really amazing community. And I love being part of it. Part of it too is just, there's such smart people there, and I learn new things all of the time. There's people who are very passionate about, say, accessibility or about, making JavaScript work in a modern way that's friendly to new developers, and, all these different things that people are interested in. And so I get to learn about all of this stuff that I wouldn't, if I was still building my own custom CMSs, which is what I did after the PHP nuke age, because I was like, nope. But if I was still doing that, I would still be in my little silo, and I, wouldn't know all these great things about like internationalization and like all the different aspects of Drupal that it kind of covers for you, and security and like all these kinds of things. So constantly learning new things. And then I think the technical problem is really interesting as well, because you're building for multiple audiences. Every time you build a feature, you have to think not only about how we're going to write the API so that developers can extend this where they need to, and the classes and objects and stuff are all named in a way that makes sense to people, blah, 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 all those problem space. But then you're also thinking about how would a non-technical content author use this feature. They're not going to know anything about modules or functions or any of that stuff. They're going to be presented with an interface. How do we build an interface around this brilliant piece of technology so that they understand it and they can use it? And I find that dichotomy really interesting and challenging, and I don't know if that comes up in other projects that are based around just one of those audiences.
This episode is brought to you by Linode, our cloud server of choice. It's so easy to get started. Head to linode.com/changelog. Pick a plan, pick a distro, and pick a location. And in minutes, deploy your Linode cloud server. They have drool-worthy hardware, native SSD cloud storage, 40 gigabit network, Intel E5 processors, simple, easy control panel, 99.9% uptime guaranteed. We are never down. 24/7 customer support, 10 data centers, 3 regions, anywhere in the world, they got you covered. Head to linode.com/changelog to get $20 in hosting credit. That's 4 months free. Once again, linode.com/changelog.
All right, Angie, you teased 4 points. You gave us 3, but I'm feeling like there's one more reason why you might be sticking around the Drupal team. So what else you got?
What is this, holding me accountable to the things I say? I would say the 4 point is actually my employer and my job. That I have this. So I work for Acquia, and Acquia is a startup that is co-owned or co-founded by Dries, the BDFL or project lead of Drupal. So the BDFL is my boss. No pressure. But I somehow lucked into, well, I didn't luck. I lucked in and I also worked my butt off for many, many years. But I have this job where I basically get paid full time to make the community awesome. So that involves, flying around the world to sprints and like sitting with developers and getting whiteboards and stuff. And let's figure out how we're going to solve this really tough problem. Or it involves, talking to the different initiative teams, trying to figure out what they're trying to build, trying to communicate that in a way that humans can understand it. And then, trying to figure out what's unblocking or how to unblock them from being awesome. So sometimes that's, kind of promoting the work that they're doing. Sometimes it's we plan a sprint for them in some locations. Sometimes it's let's fund this expert to like just bang out this piece of code that's blocking everybody or whatever it is. But my job is basically to find the toughest problems for Drupal and solve them. And it's amazing. And Acquia was really, really supportive of me as well when I kind of went through a crappy time. So I think it's that combination of the people, the learning new things all the time, the whatever my third point was.
It's a long time ago.
That was like ages ago. There was like a break in between. But anyway, it's a combination of all those things, I think, that really got me involved and keeps me involved in Drupal and excited about it.
And I asked you what hooked you, but I think maybe what might be the answer for those out there in the community of Drupal might be someone like you or many like you with the kind of energy and enthusiasm. And it seems like you're a super kind person. So, I mean, tell us about the community piece of things. Like, how are there many yous out there with the kind of care and enthusiasm and I don't know, just cool person? Like, is that what keeps people there? Like you mentioned, people.
Are there more cool people?
No, I'm the only cool person in Drupal. Right. Just kidding. No.
What do you think keeps others, basically?
There is a lot of cool people in Drupal. I mean, I think.
Well, you mentioned the conference, which seems to be just like never ending and huge. And I mean, how big does that conference get? DrupalCon.
Yeah, so DrupalCon is a really great experience. So there's about 3,000 people who come to DrupalCon North America. And about like 1,500, 1,800. So that come to the European one. So they kind of go every other. DrupalCon is a really great experience though, because it is, you get to sit and listen to people talk, and these are people that from the community, and you get to sit and have, drinks with them or work next to them at a sprint or this kind of thing. My favorite thing about DrupalCon, in addition to the knowledge sharing and the hallway track and all that stuff that's at any conference really, but we do the last day of the conference is called the Contribution Day. And that's where we have basically 2 huge rooms, like ballroom style, rooms in the conference center or whatever, with tables set up everywhere. And so one of the rooms is for new contributors. And so in that room, they do a section at the beginning of the day that's like, here's how to get a development environment set up. Here's how Git works. Here's how the issue queue works. Here's how to make your first patch and that kind of thing. And then they prefabricate a bunch of issues that would make good first patches for somebody. And then there are mentors that walk around in brightly colored t-shirts and basically work with the people there to make sure that they're getting some value out of the experience. The other room has kind of people who are established in Drupal, and the tables are all set up. So say this table's working on media, and this table's working on configuration management, and this table's working on automated testing or whatever it is. And you just go to a table that has a label that you're interested in, and then ta-da, you're working with like the 3 people who know everything about that. And, you just get to join in with them, and they're happy to have you. And then midday through the day, the people who have just written their first patch, they get to come into the big room with everybody else, and we co-mingle. And then my favorite thing is we pick 1 or 2 of those patches, and we do what's called a live commit. So like someone like myself or one of the other core committers will get up on stage and do a whole song and dance. This is usually where I find out all the ways I use Git incorrectly, because I'll hear this dramatic gasp from the audience when I type something. I'm like, okay. So I basically use fear-driven Git. That's my my thing. But basically we do like drum rolls on the tables and stuff, but we actually like do a patch review live and talk about it, and then commit it to the software, show their name in the change log or the commit log and all that kind of stuff. And so, and people just get super excited, and they leave, feeling like they've contributed to something bigger than themselves. And everybody, it's a really great way to feature awesome people. And we get the people who wrote the patch up there, the people who mentored them up there, the people who provided a review up there, to kind of show that it's not these like one-off rock star people that are getting this thing done. It's like actually, it takes a village to get a change made and stuff. And so that's a really, really fun experience, and I look forward to that every time.
So I would say a portion of that requires that, as you had said, somebody to show up, like these people that know all the things. And so I think of it from one lens, which is like, great, the people who have been around, know all the things, they show up. That's kind of required for some of the interaction you just mentioned there. And without going a little too far into the what keeps people around aspect, but I want to know, like, once you're past a certain stage of a project or your involvement or your knowledge space of it, you kind of get bored. Maybe you move on. What is it that makes those types of people show up? Because that's like a really important piece to community that I feel like, Jerod, that Drupal's just done well, and we haven't covered it much, not because we don't care about it, but just like somehow, some way this news isn't bubbling up to us, or I'm not really sure, but maybe you can kind of give us a purview into what makes these types of people show up so that you can have new contributors, you can have these experiences you just described.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to a large extent, it's the same, sort of factors I described earlier that keep me involved, also keep these people involved. We are trying to be better. I wouldn't say we're perfect yet, but we're trying to be better about not burning people to a crisp, because that's usually what happens when someone's really passionate about something. They work and work, and then, and then they start like turning into patient zero of like, making everyone else around them burnt out on Drupal as well, and their behavior and the way that they interact and things like that. So we've tried a number of different things. One is that built into our governance structures, at least for core, we're still working on this in other areas of the kind of the project, but we have what are called provisional maintainers. And so a provisional maintainer is sort of like someone who you think would make a great maintainer, but maybe either they aren't ready yet or you're not quite ready yet to see them, in that position. So we bring them on as provisional maintainers so they can try out what it would be like to be a maintainer, so they can, they can commit patches, they can review patches, this kind of stuff. But it's sort of done with the idea that that's like a mentored position. And then once they've kind of, met or exceeded the kind of threshold, and everyone's like, oh, this person's great, they become a full-fledged maintainer. Having that provisional maintainer thing is useful because it sort of puts it in the back of everyone's mind, like, I should definitely have a replacement for me at all times, and as long as you have someone in that provisional slot, then it lets you kind of go, a little bit, and you don't feel as responsible for everything when you know that there are other people to kind of carry the load. So that's one aspect that we've done. Another thing that we're playing around with, this first happened in the Drupal Association, which is like the nonprofit foundation that sort of is, responsible for the website and marketing and all the things around the Drupal project. except for the code. But they started doing like term limits and then overlapping terms and stuff like that. And so the idea that when you sign up to be, say, the security working group lead, or you sign up to be on the community working group or something like that, that is a fixed position. And so you can choose to extend it if you want, if you're still feeling good about it. But there's also a way to gracefully roll off if this is no longer your scene. And I think that helps a lot with combating that, because it gives a maximum amount of burnout, that people can be subjected to, and it gives people a way to save face when they're just like, I can't with this anymore. And so that's been really useful. I think also, we have a lot of people who care a lot about people in our community. So we have like the Diversity Inclusion Initiative, we have the Community Working Group, and they are really trying hard to make the community a welcoming and open place for people, and to take people aside when they're not making the community like that, and try and work with them. Just be like, what's going on? Like, how can we help? This kind of thing. And so I think all of those different things sort of add up. And I wouldn't say we're perfect. We've definitely had some very high profile, even, flame outs in our community. But I think that the people there are well-intentioned. They're really trying hard to make it a place where people come and if you need to take time off, that's awesome. And we actively encourage that. Please do that. But you still get people, and I was one of those myself, who were just like, I have to stay because nothing will happen if I don't, this kind of thing, and overwhelming sense of responsibility and stuff. So I think we're just a bit smarter about that, because it's an old project. We've seen people flame out like this multiple times. So I think trying to catch it earlier when we can, or, taking people aside when we can, those are different ways we combat it. But I don't think we have this down by any means. But that's some of the strategies we employ anyway.
It sounds like the community definitely has its scars over the years. Any open source project that's going to be around for 15, 16, 17 years, you're, like you said, humans are going to human. So we're going to have issues. But it sounds like y'all are doing a lot of things right or well. And that probably comes from time and experience, but it also comes from caring and trying. You're not going to do things well if you don't care to, or if you don't try to. So that sounds like a spectacular aspect of the Drupal community. While we're talking about the people and how awesome they are, probably a good chance to mention Gabe and thank him for getting this show put together. So Gabe, help me out with the last name. Angie, is it Solis? Sullis. Gabe Sullis. Without him, this conversation would not be happening. Gabe, longtime listener, and suggested Drupal when we put a tweet out a couple weeks back asking what are things that we should be covering that we're not covering. And he mentioned that we haven't really done anything on Drupal. Much to my surprise, I was like, dang, we really haven't talked about Drupal ever. So we got in touch with Gabe, and props to Gabe, because we asked who would be a great person to talk to. And most of the time that's when people will say, I would be pretty good at talking about that. Most people do that, which is fine. It's often the case. But he didn't say that. He said, actually, Angie Byron would be a spectacular representative. So thanks, Gabe, for listening and for helping us put this show together.
That's awesome. Yeah. And Gabe, what he does in Drupal is he co-leads the API First initiative. And so this is the initiative that's working on Drupal's underlying REST API, working on putting JSON API support into core, working on making sure that when you write a decoupled front end or a mobile application or anything of that nature that's consuming data out of Drupal or putting data back into Drupal, that you have a wonderful and fun time doing so. Asterisk, awesome. We're still working on it, but that's what
Well, that might be a good segue into modern Drupal, or what Drupal looks like in 2018. And I guess, gosh, it's almost 2019. So for people that are just coming to the project, and maybe they just heard the show and they heard the history, and probably the awesome community is like, okay, that's something I can get into. What should they find? What kind of technology is there? Where is its sweet spot? What does Drupal look like nowadays?
Sure. I'd say what Drupal has focused on a lot more in recent years is filling out, like I mentioned before, that, Drupal used to be a very small core, very unopinionated, and very, kind of like bare bones. It's basically like, here's a box of Legos, dump it on the table, have fun with that, I'd say what we've focused on in more recent years is okay, so we still want the box of Legos, and we still want the ability to like put the Legos in different places and all this kind of stuff and build the castle or the canoe or whatever it is. However, there's certain things that 80% of websites are going to want. For example, the ability to upload images, the ability to, lately it's been the ability to moderate content. So build content in a draft mode before it's published and have control over who's allowed to move things from draft to publish and these kinds of things. The ability to do like a page layout building experience and some of these other kinds of things. And so what Drupal's really concentrated on the last, I'd say this is since 2011, so 8 years almost, is really making the core that you download something that is usable out of the box to build, a good chunk of sites, so that you're really only needing to go to the contributed modules or custom modules for stuff that actually is kind of off the beaten path. And so for your average, content management experience, it's, all kind of built in there and ready to go. So Drupal 8 is the current version of Drupal we have. If you used Drupal in 2010, that probably would have been Drupal 6. Which was a great release, don't get me wrong, but Drupal 7 and 8 really focused a lot on the usability piece of things, so you wouldn't recognize the interface at all anymore, I don't think. And it's also really focused on making the out-of-the-box product a lot more feature-filled, to the point that we just had the Drupal 8.6 release a couple of months ago, and it ships with a demo that shows what Drupal can actually do. Because that was like one of the biggest things is you'd install WordPress, and it's immediately obvious what WordPress is and what it's for. And then you install Drupal and it looks like an ugly blog from 1996, like Slashdot or something. It's like, why would I ever use this thing when I could use this other thing? And so it was not doing a good job at all of really highlighting Drupal's strengths, which is, the ability to create structured content. So you can create these things called entities. The entities can have discrete fields on them of different types, like a numeric field, date time field, geographic field showing, storing lat long or whatever, like all kinds of different things. Then you can enter content in a structured way. You can mix and match the content out, so say you can just post the whole thing as, one piece of content, or you can say make a sidebar block that pulls in the title, the teaser, the author, and that's it. You can output the entire thing as a JSON feed. Like, it's very flexible in what it allows you to do, but we weren't highlighting that aspect of Drupal at all. And so Drupal ships with like a little demo called Umami, and it's like a fake restaurant website. So it ships with some sample content with some images, so you get to see what Drupal's media experience is like. You get to see how we built out the content types and the relationships between the content types. So I think recipes relate back to articles or something like that. Like they use some kind of a reference field to show off that. They're working for Drupal 8.7 on a multilingual demo, like really showing off that capability of Drupal, because that's pretty unique. Something that we offer that a lot of people don't really know about, which is why not show it off, and then as the media and layout experiences get more and more fleshed out, right now those are both kind of offered in an experimental way because we're still actively working on them, but as those get finalized and kind of production ready, then you'll see those things go into the demo as well. So that's something I'm really excited about, is like my role in Drupal is I'm a core committer, but I'm also a product manager, so my job is to kind of keep an eye on what all of our various competitors are doing, keep an eye on what our users are complaining about, keep an eye on, kind of the gap analysis between those two things, and figure out where we should be focusing our efforts. And so I'm really excited about this direction change, because it basically eliminates like 30 hours of messing around, downloading modules and configuring them just so and whatever with every site build. You just kind of download it, it's ready to go. And then you work on the really interesting parts of your site that are not like, how is a content author going to put stuff in here? So I'd say that's the biggest directional change. I could talk too about like some of the development initiatives we have going on at the moment, if that's of interest to people, or if you want more of like a high level thing. It's basically like make it more powerful out of the box is the biggest, directional
Make
change.
it more powerful. That's definitely, that sounds like a high level goal.
Yeah.
Right. Let's make this thing better.
It seems kind of Rails-ish in a way too, where it's sort of convention by configuration, but not quite the same configuration, more also like
different level of abstraction.
Yeah, exactly. But similar roots in terms of ideology.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it too is even though we are say, configuring a default experience that'll work for like 80% of people, you still at all times need to be mindful of that 20%, because that 20% is very vocal and definitely does not want to be cut out from being able to do the crazy things that they want to do. Like back in 2007 or 8 or something, there were people that were building like little tiny Drupal distributions that fit on a USB stick that could be shipped to disaster areas so that they could just plug a USB stick in and start gathering data of like all the different people who are in the area. I mean, It's like people do all kinds of crazy stuff with Drupal. They use it to run like ship lines and stuff, or like TV channel, like, what's coming up on the TV, like all kinds of things people use Drupal for. So we don't ever want to like reduce the amount of flexibility you can do with Drupal. But at the same time, at the end of the day, most people just want to put their content in it and get it out and have it not look like crap. That's kind of like the dream. And also have the experience not be super frustrating. And so I'd say that's mostly, been like the big, kind of shift. But we've also built a lot of new powerful developer features in Drupal as well, like the configuration management aspect. So everything can be, exported and then, moved from dev to stage to live via Git. It's all in YAML files and that kind of thing. And the API First initiative, which I mentioned, which Dave is part of, and some of the other ones are, are very focused on that developer audience. We definitely don't forget about them ever, because they're the people doing the work, so they definitely care about the stuff that affects them. But the directional change of like also really prioritizing the content author, aka the victim of Drupal, who's got to use the thing that you set up every day.
The victim.
Yeah. But making sure that they, actually have a good experience, and they don't, because when they don't have a good experience, they're going to gripe to the IT people and they're going to replace the thing with something else, So we want them to have a good experience.
Curious from a product manager perspective, you mentioned that one of the things you do is keep an eye on competitors and see what they are up to. And I'm just wondering, what's the most apples to apples comparison of a competitor? I think people would think of WordPress, but there's definitely some differences there with origination, and WordPress was a publishing platform that people have definitely molded it into more of a generic CMS. But when you think of Drupal's competitors, what's like the top 3 that you're like, these are things that are pretty much do the same thing and maybe do it in a different way?
It's interesting because, while we're still in this Framlication mode, like we'll see what the future brings, but while we're still in this Framlication mode of trying to reach all ends of that audience, I'd say our big 3 competitors are everything from like enterprise CMS, like Adobe Experience Manager, like that end of things, to WordPress, like that's definitely, we're seeing WordPress in different competes and stuff like that, all the way to like something like Contentful, and Contentful is like a backend, a purely like data modeling backend that you then pipe out to JSON. So really Drupal is I would argue the advantage of Drupal is that it can be all 3 of those things. But if you want, only the decoupled backend thingy thing, Contentful might be a better choice for you. But I like Drupal because I'm fundamentally a very lazy person. I'll just like be right out with it. I kind of feel like, I often get clients that don't know what they want. And so this allows me to learn one thing. And then when they want just the basic website set up, it's like, okay, boom, boom, done. And also it needs a photo gallery. Okay, great. Click, click, click. Oh, and also it needs to integrate with Sales first. Okay, well, that's a click and a couple of codes and that kind of thing. It's really flexible that way. And then, now my CEO got this like BlackBerry from 1992 and he wants to make sure that can work with it, whatever, this kind of thing. It's able to evolve with the changing needs of a site really easily, which is awesome. And so that's kind of where I would say, we look at our competitors as kind of the range of those different things. I would say things that are not our competition would be things like Squarespace, Wix. Those would definitely be like down market from us, like those things that are like you're building a 5-page website and you want to do it in 4 seconds and you don't want to think. Like we're not in that space. We're not in the space of like Tumblr or, things of that nature. But I would say for anything above that, that is definitely kind of the area that Drupal plays in. And yeah, it's fascinating to look through some of the case studies on Drupal.org and see how people are using Drupal because it's used everywhere.
This This episode is brought to you by our friends at GoCD. GoCD is an open source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. Check them out at gocd.org or on GitHub at github.com/GoCD. GoCD provides continuous delivery out of the box with its built-in pipelines, advanced traceability, and value stream visualization. With GoCD, you can easily model, orchestrate, and visualize complex workflows from end to end with no problem. They support Kubernetes and modern infrastructure with elastic on-demand agents and cloud deployments. To learn more about GoCD, visit gocd.org/changelog. It's free to use, and they have professional support and enterprise add-ons available from ThoughtWorks. Once again, gocd.org/changelog. And by our friends at Red Hat who produce Command Line Heroes. Today we're featuring a segment from Season 2, Episode 4, titled Fail Better.
That whole fail fast mantra, let's be honest, it often gets used as a way to try and shortcut things towards success. But what if, instead of telling each other to hurry up and fail fast, we encouraged each other to actually fail better? Season 2 of Command Line Heroes is all about the lived experience of working in development, what it really feels like and how it really pans out when we're living on the command line. And that's why we're devoting a whole episode to dealing with failure, because it's those moments that push us to adapt. The stuff we call failure, it's the heartbeat of evolution, and open source developers are embracing that evolution. Of course, that's a lot easier said than done.
All right, learn more about Command Line Heroes from Red Hat at red.ht/command line. So I would say developers are probably lazy to some degree. We have maybe
Big time lazy.
large audience of developers. I'm just assuming some things here, having done, I don't know what, 320-ish of these shows before. So kind of have an eye for what
we might have the laziest audience of all podcasts.
yeah, exactly. I mean, in a good way, of course.
Said with love.
So I'm imagining there's a skill set that's been built up by most developers that they can reuse or easily, move to something else that they wanted to. So, this excitement, this community, this energy you bring, Angie, may be a surprise potentially to a lot of listeners of this show. And they're thinking, geez, well, what does it really take to be a Drupal developer? What skills do they need to have? Maybe they already got them and it's like, I don't have to go relearn something new. I've already got the necessary skills. Break down that for us.
Sure. So, I should say that, Drupal is still written in PHP and, MySQL, JavaScript, that kind of thing in general. I would say the skills you need, generally speaking, though, you don't want to start coding with Drupal until after you've tried to do everything you can without coding. And what I mean by that is that often people come into Drupal and they're a PHP developer or they're a Java developer or whatever, and they come in and they're like, I know how to code. This is going to be great, And so they immediately go in, find those extension points and start going crazy. That is not the right approach for something like Drupal that has this huge community of contributed modules and 40,000 contributors and all this other kind of thing, because usually whatever problem you're trying to solve has already been solved by somebody.
Yeah,
yes.
that's awesome.
And they've been solved not only in a way that solves your problem, but in a way that solves general problems. And that's where we get into the flexibility of being able to handle all these different use cases. Like the views module is a fantastic piece of art. And this is something that ships in core now. But views module is essentially a UI around an SQL query builder, more or less. And so you can create listings of content, of users, of taxonomy terms, of whatever, you have on your site, products for e-commerce, that kind of thing. You can filter those products to say, I only want to show ones that have this tag, or I only want to show ones that are by this author, or this kind of stuff. You can sort them. You can do all the things you can do with SQL. And then there's a layer on top of that where you can say, how do I want that output to be displayed? I want it to be displayed as a grid view, or I want it to be displayed as a table with sortable columns, or I want it to be displayed as a sidebar block. a million different things, a calendar, whatever. And like learning that one piece of Drupal saves you infinite amount of time doing anything that you would be doing in code, because you just click these things together in minutes, and then your site all of a sudden starts looking like your actual site. So those kinds of things. There's some learning curve to go up that are kind of like Drupalisms that we do in Drupal that you would not necessarily be used to if you knew SQL by the back of your hand and you were already a competent PHP developer. That can actually get you into trouble sometimes with Drupal. So I would say first, make sure no one else has already solved this, or that there's not already a generalized tool to solve problems like the ones you're trying to solve. Then after that, if you write your own custom code, that is some PHP development. We use object-oriented PHP in Drupal 8. It follows all the PHP Fig standards, which for people who aren't PHP people, that means nothing. But basically, it looks a lot like every other modern PHP application. So it's nice because when you come into it, you can be like, oh, yeah, I know how this works. And so lots of classes, lots of PHP files with little bits of code in them, that kind of thing. They also, you also generally build a user interface for any functionality that you're adding. So there's hooks and stuff like that for that. So you can easily expose, say, an admin page for your piece of functionality that has a bunch of form elements in it. There's an API for that. And then if you want to be fancy, you can also, add in some CSS and JavaScript that gets pulled in there. You want to be careful about that, though, because, again, Drupal, infinitely flexible thing. We want all of the output of Drupal to be themable, it's called. So that means it's overridable so that, just because you picked, green buttons or something for your thing doesn't mean that every site is going to have green buttons. So we actually run everything that's output to the screen through the theme system, and that allows individual site authors to build their own kind of customizations over what you're providing. And so I would say the actual mechanical tools required to be a Drupal developer are quite similar to being any kind of web developer, really. There's PHP, but if you know Java or Ruby or any other language, PHP is pretty easy to pick up. It has a lot of dollar signs in it. That's about it. No. But,
dollar signs.
Yeah, sure. As you're describing it, I was not going to ask it, but I want to ask it now since there's a slight break in here for this. It seems like you could be a extreme PHP type person to help build out some of the deep innards, I want to say maybe. And then maybe somebody who's not, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, not really a developer, somebody who's kind of developer-esque, familiar with, but maybe not comfortable with building out modules and hooks and APIs, but somebody who understands the web language and can put things together. Is that accurate to say?
I think that is accurate to say. I think if you're going to become a core developer, you definitely need to know the inner guts of PHP and all that kind of stuff. But you really, that's, if you want to do that, we would love to have you. But that's something people only usually do after they've already.
To be productive.
Not at all. No. And we do go out of our way because, again, that the non-technical user is one of our primary audiences. We call them the site builders, the people who don't know, they would never be able to write their own SQL query, but they know how to click together a block in views showing, hot content or whatever. Like they know how to click that together. So I would say most of the time when you're building something in Drupal, you should be able to do it without writing any code. And then the areas where you can't do things without writing any code, usually there's a module already available for that. So if, say, bibliographies or podcasts or something like that, you could find modules for those kinds of things. And in the event that your use case is so specialized because you're integrating with some third party, I don't know, AS400 that was invented back in the 60s or something, then there's APIs to do that stuff. And then you do need to start writing PHP. Yeah, why not, right?
Let's talk about, here's the one hiccup I always find in that case of the site builders, as you mentioned, maybe that's the word. I think that's what you said, is, you've got your dev environment and then you got your deploy process and you've got this live site. What's the scenario there for someone who's not really that familiar, who can put things together, but it's like, well, do I FTP this thing? Like, what's the process to take it from a dev environment, or as you mentioned, different output being themable, or, adopting this theme system? How do you give someone the skills to play, have fun, build out, maybe even tinker and solve some true problems for their business, and then get it out there and actually usable?
You can upload everything with FTP still, if that's your workflow. Most of our users, especially in Drupal 8, are a little bit more advanced than that. So they use oftentimes Git to do their deployment workflow. So they keep their website files underneath a Git repository, and then they will commit stuff to the dev environment and then cut a tag and then cut that over to production. So that's oftentimes how people do it. There's also a PHP tool called Composer, which is kind of similar to NPM or something of that nature, that allows you to say, I require these and these and these, Drupal modules plus these external libraries plus this, that, and the other thing. And a lot of people use Composer in their deployment workflow to say Composer update to get all the new code and then commit that to Git and then fire it over. You don't need to do any of that stuff. If you are a totally non-technical user, again, we cater to both audiences. So if you're a totally non-technical user, then your way that you would do that is there's a user interface for the configuration management system. So you would click to change your site all around, add some content types, add some blocks to the page, change the theme, do whatever configuration you're going to do. And then you go to the screen, you click export, you get a little zip file full of YAML files, which is all of your site configuration. And then you go over to your production website, you upload that zip file, it extracts it automatically for you, and it says, here's all the crap you're going to change. Are you sure you want to do this? And you say yes, and then boom, your stuff is live on production. So again, everything in Drupal pretty much has both a developer-friendly way. We have a tool called Drush, which is Drupal shell that can, automate all of this stuff. You can run it in shell scripts, this kind of thing, and it can enable modules for you, or update configuration, or all kinds of things. They have commands for just about everything. So you can go that route, or you can even just click everything together yourself if you want to do that. So it really caters to both audiences.
I say many audiences. I mean, there really isn't an audience that Drupal doesn't cater to. I mean, everyone who really wants to get deep as a core committer, or someone who wants to be a site builder. Or it seems like the type of developer that is catered to from Drupal is just to some degree infinite.
Yeah, it's interesting because Drupal 8 was kind of our big pivot point as a project. This is where we started embracing all these kind of modern best practices with, using object-oriented PHP. Prior to that, it was all procedural language, mostly because PHP just wasn't very good at object-oriented programming until about that time. Started adopting external tools like Composer and all these. I could list a bunch of PHP libraries that you don't know, but Symfony is one of them. It's an underlying framework for starting HTTP kernels for applications and stuff like that. But all these basically kind of we shifted focus from Drupal from being it's kind of not invented here sort of attitude to hey, let's get off the island and embrace the best solution for every problem that we have. So some of the stuff does make sense for us to do ourselves, like the whole entity system that I talked about. But some stuff, it's let's just use Guzzle because it's really good at parsing web service data and, doing that kind of thing. So we'll just let that handle it. So that transition, though, to adopting modern best practices, object-oriented programming, this kind of thing, it did cause a big rift in the community back a few years back when Drupal 8 first came out. Because our users up until that point have been a lot of I know how to copy and paste code and modify it, but I don't really know how to how it works, that kind of stuff. So they can make a module based on copying and pasting some other module and kind of messing with it. But Drupal 8 with, kind of using object-oriented programming and Composer and all these new things requires a bit more upfront learning if you're going to be doing development stuff on it. And that kind of scared a lot of people, and they didn't know if they can make the jump or not. Fortunately, many people have made the jump, and people who are already developers, they love it. So we don't have to convince them. It's mostly the non-technical site builder plus kind of people that knew enough about PHP to be dangerous, but not really enough to be a core developer. They struggled a lot with that transition, and some of them still do. So I would say that that's, one area that we definitely had to watch, is make sure people are okay when they're making this jump. Fortunately, the site building experience between 7 and 8 is very, very much the same. You just get more cool stuff in Drupal 8, so that's really nice. But for people who were doing any kind of coding stuff, there was that transition. But the nice thing is once you've made that transition, Drupal 8 is built in the same way you'd expect any other modern application to be built. So that's really, really powerful. So once you kind of level up your skills, it only helps you for anything else you're going to do.
Where do you think the community is growing most at? So is it site builders, users, people who need to build sites using Drupal? or is it, or is there a parallel to even contributors or those joining the community to be, I don't want to say developers, just like somebody who's like helping drive the project at a technical level? Like, where are you seeing your growth, and where are you seeing maybe plateaus? Where are you seeing hockey sticks? Help us understand like just growth generally.
I think we saw a major change, a few major changes. I mean, it's almost a 20-year-old project, so we've been through a lot of major changes.
Right.
So I think one major change was it kind of used to be where, the business would make the decision that in order to maximize efficiency, we're going to choose a content management system, right? And then they'd give that task to the IT department. And then the IT department would go and look at a bunch of different things, and then they would pick one. And in that kind of scenario, Drupal does really well because they can see the power of it. It's flexible. It's got APIs for everything. We can extend it easily to whatever weird new requirement is going to come down the pipe. So Drupal would often score really well. And in fact, a lot of times how Drupal got into these kind of larger organizations that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find it is because, there was a techie at that company that was tasked to find a tool that did a thing, and they found Drupal, and then that sort of like took off like wildfire within the organization. But there was a shift that happened, a few years back, maybe as many as 10 years back, I don't know, of letting the quote unquote victims of the CMS be involved in the selection process. Like the person who has to use that thing every day to add boring press releases, those people, having them involved in the process. And that makes a ton of sense, right? It's like any agile development thing. It's like have all of the stakeholders in the room when you're making big decisions. It's like totally makes sense. But Drupal at the time would fall down absolutely flat in that situation because it was a tool built for developers. It didn't have a WYSIWYG editor. It didn't have the ability to upload images out of the box, like all of these different things. Because, from a developer point of view, it's like, I could download that. I know how to get that. That's no problem. But so we saw Drupal struggling a lot during that period of time. And so that was one of the driving things to focus so much on the user experience and making sure that it is full featured out of the box. So when you do stand Drupal up next to anything else, it looks and it acts about the same. And then they can focus in on the stuff that makes it different. So I'd say that's one huge trend. Another huge trend that happened in the recent years is the mobile thing. Like back in my day, I'm swinging my thing on my like stick and shaking at the kids on my lawn, whatever. But back in my day, it was like we had to deal with 800 by 600 and 1024 by 768, or I think that even came later. It was like at first it was just 640 by 480 and 800 by 600. And then, whoa, man, now we got to deal with 3 screen sizes. What is this?
Well, hang on a second. For those listening, she's talking about resolutions.
Sorry, yes.
Just in case.
We used to have screens and they were like apart from the computer. And you had to
right. Responsive design has arrived. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's a thing, and it's just the way it is now. And it's very difficult to enter this space today and not assume that's how it is, because you've got TVs, you've got mobile phones, you got tablets, you just can name all the IoT related or connected devices that has some sort of display. A watch that's just like a 2x2 square in your wrist. I mean, so the screen is infinite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's literally you have no knowledge of how what you're creating is going to get consumed at all anymore. Like it's you never did. Like
right.
People could always, do different things. But yeah, today especially, it's not possible.
The web was confined and now it's free.
Yeah, now it's free.
To roam.
And it's wonderful that it's roaming, except all
right.
web developers everywhere are crying into their soup. But, that's like a whole thing. But what was great about that is we were uniquely poised, not necessarily accidentally, but sort of accidentally, to take advantage of this, because Drupal has always been built by nerdy people who care about like things like semantic markup or whatever. And they care about things like structured data. And so when the requirements now became like, oh my gosh, we have to have a separation of presentation and logic, and how do we do that? It's like, oh, well, we've already had that since 2002. And when it became like, we need structured data so that on the mobile app, we can, create a smaller view of this thing that doesn't have all the doohickeys in the fields. It's like, oh, well, we've already got it in the database that way, so we'll just output it slightly differently. So that was really great. So Drupal was able to really, kind of meet the needs of, modern web development really easily that way. The one area that I'd say we're struggling in a bit is is in the JavaScript area. I don't say we're struggling, we're working on it, but this is an area where people will look at this and be like, because originally JavaScript, again, back in my day, shaking my stick on the lawn, it was something you used to make like annoying alert boxes, and that was pretty much the only thing you did with JavaScript. And then, Ajax was a thing, and then Google Gmail was a thing, and then, wow, this language actually has some legs to it and stuff.
Right.
And so we did eventually see the value of that, and so we adopted jQuery back in 2007, I want to say, which was really cool actually, because it kind of put jQuery on the map and also got us up and running with a JavaScript framework that people could use to build kind of neat, dynamic UIs and stuff like that. But a lot of that legacy code now is still showing, like, say, 10 years later, where it's not quite so fun anymore. So we have a team working on implementing like a redesigned admin experience with React and using modern JavaScript practices and like introducing perhaps a build step or introducing, different types of things, maybe, figuring out how we're going to render things, if we're going to do it on the client side or we're going to do it on the server side. So this is a really interesting place that Drupal's in right now, where we've kind of formulated this as a formal initiative. It's the Admin UI and JavaScript Modernization Initiative, and they built some prototypes in terms of, here's how React works, how it can work with Drupal, this kind of thing. I mean, people are already building decoupled Drupal sites, so that's nothing new. But trying to design a core Framlication that's infinitely flexible in React is a totally different problem than building, say, a website front end in React. So that's been a really interesting process to kind of see those different things come together. So the modernization of our JavaScript is something we're actively working on, but we're definitely not there yet. So if you are a JavaScripty person and you look at Drupal, it'll make you plug your nose, but don't worry, we're working on it. But in the meantime, there's a lot of great energy around that initiative, and they're really trying to build the admin front end in a way that adopts modern best practices in the JavaScript community, just like we did with the PHP community with Drupal 8. And so, trying to build it based off, like, I think it's called Create React App or something like that. Like, it's like a standard best practice way that people will start building React applications. They're using GitHub instead of Drupal.org as the, main development hub, like these kinds of things to try to really meet JavaScript developers in that JavaScript community where they're at. And get them involved in Drupal that way. So it is something we've always, like, Dries has always been really great at kind of, the phrases like skating to where the puck shall be. So he's really good at, like, spotting these trends, and trying to spin up initiatives, make sure Drupal, is there to meet it, because Drupal kind of got its start by being cutting edge and being at that, outer edge of all these things. And so it's great that continues even almost 20 years later, that we're still working on this stuff. So, yeah.
I was going to ask you, like, I was going to ask you, actually, the kind of like, what's your biggest challenge? It sounds like that may have just answered it. Is that the biggest challenge right now for Drupal?
I think another big challenge is just the way, like, this is sort of a pendulum swing. It's sort of like how client server versus peer-to-peer versus client server, like, that's a pendulum swing that goes back and forth. There's also a pendulum swing that goes back and forth between picking something that does 80% of what you need, maybe not exactly in the way you want it, but you can extend it to make it better, versus just starting from complete scratch and building your own custom thing. And I think we're right now in a pendulum swing where a lot of people, they're hiring JavaScript developers. JavaScript developers want to build a front end in exactly the way that they want to build it. They want to talk to a back end that gives it exactly the information that they want out of it, and these kinds of things. And they would look at something like Drupal and say, oh, that's too bloated for what I want, And so that's an interesting area that we find ourselves in, because there's trade-offs there, right? Like, if you build a custom thing, you definitely can't get a non-developer site builder to, like, click around in an admin interface and add additional columns and add additional blocks. Like, that requires talking to a developer and getting them to change some code. And then now you've got the block where you want it on the page. It also eschews a lot of the advantages of Drupal, because Drupal's theme system support, we have, I think it's AA rating accessibility markup, not AAA, but AA rating accessibility markup. So we've already solved all those hard problems. You get something out of the box in Drupal that is very useful on a screen reader. Even the dynamic bits and pieces that we have, like the toolbar and whatever, are all vetted by the accessibility team before they go out. So you throw out all of that, you throw out the theme ability. Yeah, it's awesome. It's so exciting to see how people just spring up from the community and they're like, I care about this thing. And you just get out of their way and they do amazing things for you, and it's really, really cool.
Especially when it's something that you think is important, but you also think is maybe boring to implement or, not highest priority, but to somebody else it is highest priority. And then everybody gets the benefits of it. That's just the great stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the way we handle, we're a huge open source project, and we've got, even on just core, there's like 4,500 developers. So it's huge, it's geographically distributed, and there's a lot of volunteers. So they come in, do one thing, and then leave and never come back again. So we've had to handle this by, the core development process introduces these things called gates, which is like a patch doesn't make it into core unless it satisfies these gates. And so there's a security gate, an automated testing gate. We have to make sure we don't introduce a bug twice, right? There's an accessibility gate, a usability gate. I'm forgetting some of the other ones, front end markup gate, all these kinds of things to make sure that all the new code, even though it's written by 4,500 people who probably never met each other, that it still works and conforms the same way, when it gets integrated. So it's something we take really seriously because, they are no longer running it, but the White House was running Drupal for many years. And so, that's like the highest target, site you could think of to
Yeah,
it was a big deal. And so, we try very hard. We have a lot of enterprise, in air quotes, users. And so we try really hard to incorporate best practice standards that work for them. We have a security team that handles not just core itself, but all of the contributed modules. And they, will issue what are called security announcements. They use the CVE system, all the stuff. We do it on a scheduled, regular cadence, so everyone knows, the second Wednesday of the month is going to suck for you, this kind of thing. But that way, you know when you need to buy pizzas for your whole department or whatever, that kind of stuff. So we've learned a lot. Basically, this project sprung up kind of organically. It was one dude's brainchild or whatever, and then it other people found uses and values out of it. They contributed back to it. Other people found even more uses and values, and they contributed. It's just grown organically. It's become this amazing thing that people use for all kinds of stuff. I love that when I fix a bug in Drupal, I'm also fixing it for the ACLU or Amnesty International. It's yes, this is great. So
wow. Yep.
Yeah,
that's one thing that really gets you, right? Is when you can make a change or an impact that seems so small because it's in quotes open source or free time or volunteer or whatever, that you can impact literally millions of people's lives. That's the easiest way to pay it forward, right? It's just, as you said, flip some bits versus burgers and boom, you impact millions. That's so cool. And I love the fact that you're so focused on the long tail. Nothing you've said is short-term goals.
Right.
And you don't even seem to be fazed by what might be today's challenges, which is why I kind of framed it that way. What are you challenged by today? Because it seems that you have personally the right kind of attitude, but corporately as a culture and as a community, the right kind of attitude to persevere through what might seem like hurdles or roadblocks to the next step, to get past those and focus on a long tail, because you have such a wide, diverse user base, contributor base, and that's so awesome to hear that. And I'm pleasantly surprised, Jerod. I don't know about you, but I didn't quite expect this level of just happiness for such a cool community. Not trying to be negative.
You'd actually come on here all depressed and be like, "This is the worst."
They give us great drugs.
I wasn't sure what to expect.
Yeah.
And I'm personally just that surprised by it. How about this? Let's close this way. I'm sure there's somebody or many people listening to this, probably tons of Drupal fans who've been there since the beginning, maybe tons that this is their first experience or they've heard it before, but they just don't know the backstory. They're like, where do I go to keep up? So where does someone go that is keeping up or wants to keep up? Where do they go to keep up with Drupal?
Yeah, I would say there's a drupal.org/planets, Planet Drupal is kind of a good starting point. That's where people will talk about new modules that they're working on, or they'll talk about different events that are happening, this kind of thing. I would say also, if you could There's Drupal user groups that get together all over the world, and I think the best way to really learn about Drupal is to meet some of the people involved. Because the first time that you say Drupal in front of another human and they don't go like "bless you," or something, like it's like, wow, oh my gosh, there's like people who know about this, and so I would say, find if you have access to a local community. Go there, go to a local camp or a local user group meetup, something like that, because I don't, obviously I don't, it's a big community, there's lots of places, but I've never been to one of those, and I travel a lot. I've never been to one of those and not felt like a warm, welcoming presence from everybody there. And so I'd say that's a great way to get involved. If you can make it to a Drupal con, that's even better. You can be part of that sprint experience and all that kind of stuff that we talked about. If you're looking for online resources, I'd say Drupal Planet is probably the widest range. That'll get you everything from really super technical, in the weeds articles to kind of philosophical things and all kinds of stuff. And then, and the Drupal Association also would be a good source of like kind of high profile case studies, different initiatives the community is working on, and that kind of stuff.
Awesome. We'll drop a few of these links in the show notes. If you're listening, don't pull over now. Wait till you get back or whatever. Check the show notes. We also obviously do awesome transcripts. Thank you, Alex, for making that happen. And the rest of the community. I mean, Hacktoberfest has been huge, Jerod, for us. I'll put that out there. You've been, how many PRs, Jerod?
I'm burning a hole in our merge button. So.
Nice.
We've been pleasantly surprised by the community support. That's right. Merged. It's now a merged button because everything's merged.
So our transcripts are open source. You can contribute back that way. So if we've said something that seemed unintelligible, go to the transcript. If it's there, you can just search unintelligible and easily get a PR that way. If it's still the month of October, maybe you get 5 of them. You get a T-shirt for Hacktoberfest. If it's after that,
wow.
Hey, do it for the lulz. Do it for the greater community, and just make this conversation easier to read. Likewise, our show notes are also open source. So if we've said something that has a link that you're like, it needs to be in the show notes, go to the show. There's a link there that says edit on GitHub. You can fork it, add it back, get a PR. Really easy way to get into open source. We are kind. We are friendly. We appreciate your support, obviously, for our show notes and transcripts. And likewise, again, these links will be in the show notes, so check that. Angie, any closing thoughts? I mean, it's been such an honor to talk to you. I mean, you got so much energy. You got me fired up for a Wednesday. I love it. Way more than I expected, and I love that too.
Ditto.
So help us close by just sharing any final thoughts around, what you've experienced here on the show or parts of your community we just need to know more about.
I really like the format of this show. Like you always get kind of stressed out about any public speaking kind of thing, but I just want to say, like, you guys make it like really literally like a conversation. It's like I'm talking to old friends, even though we've never met. And I love that very much. And I also love the idea of, encouraging your listener base to improve the transcripts, because those are so helpful, both to people who, can't listen or can't, for whatever reason, as well as, like, I'm sure people take those and probably translate them into different languages and stuff. So I think it's
not yet.
Oh,
not yet.
Well, there you go. There's a PR for you. Yeah. But yeah,
cool.
I'm so happy that Gabe put us in contact with one another, because this has been a great experience.
Yes. Let's close by saying thank you, Gabe. Thanks, Gabe.
Woo, Gabe.
Thanks, Angie. Great talking to you.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Changelog. If you enjoyed this show, send it to a friend, tweet about it, and rate, review, or recommend it wherever you listen. Thank you to our sponsors, Rollbar, Linode, GoCD, and Command Line Heroes. Bandwidth is provided by Fastly. Learn more about them at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This show is hosted by Adam Stacoviak and Jerod Santo. The edit and mix is by me, Tim Smith, and the funky beats are by the master of beats, the magician of rhythm, the incomparable Breakmaster Cylinder. Find more episodes of The Changelog and our other compelling shows at changelog.com/podcasts. Thanks again for listening. See you next week.
I'm Nick Nisi.
This is K-Ball.
And I'm Rachel White.
We're panelists on JS Party, a community celebration of JavaScript and the web.
Every Thursday at noon Central, a few of us get together and chat about JavaScript, Node, and topics ranging from practical accessibility to weird web APIs.
You could just eval the text that you're given, and that's I think that's basically what it's doing.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. This is not legal advice to eval text as it comes in.
Join us live on Thursdays at noon Central. Listen and Slack with us in real time, or wait for the recording to hit. New episodes come out each Friday.
Find the show at changelog.com/JSParty or wherever you listen to podcasts.